Okay, today we are going to simply learn about a feature that Fusion has called joints. Here's what joints do in a nutshell. So after you get something modeled, you can actually add joints to it to make it move like it would in real life. So you can add constraints to those joints so it doesn't go too far. You can add, I think there's like 6 different kinds of joints. So this is eventually what you're going to work up to, but let's take a look at what these joints are real quick. All right, so the joints are up in this menu under the assemble and then joint. There's actually 2 kinds that you can do. You can do joint or as built joint. Right now we're just going to look at joint. The big difference is as built means that the pieces are already in place where they go. Joint will actually move them into place and then put a joint in between them. So let's go ahead and go to joint, and it's going to ask you for 2 components to join together. Right now I have 2 bodies and they're in the same component. So if I try to select them, it's only going to select them together. So I wanted to make you aware of this first. This is the reason that we got you in the habit of making new components for the Fusion Cubes project, because everything has to be in new components in order to do joints and really anything else in Fusion. Like it just likes you to have different parts into different components. So see, each component has its own little folder full of bodies. But if I have the bodies next to each other in the same bodies folder, that means they're in the same component, and I can't really do much with that. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that cube because that was just my example. And let's show this one. So now I can take the main component up here, which only has my floor in it. And that's going to be my first thing. Let's see if it lets me. Let's go back into this. Yeah, it's not going to let me do that one either. So I'll just show 2 components then. So here's component 1. It's going to ask me not only to select the component, but also to select like a pivot point or a snap point where the joint is going to kind of land. When we do the first kind, which is rigid, it really doesn't matter where that pivot goes or that joint origin. So I'll just show you what that looks like. That little circle with the half moon thing, that's the joint origin. It's asking you to place one of those whenever you click. So I'm just going to click here, and then I'm going to click on my second component. See, it's got this one selected now. So now it moved on to component 2. So it's asking, what am I joining that thing to with a joint? And I'm just going to click on that one. And it's going to take those 2 joint origins and smash them together. So I picked the center of that face on the box and the center of this face on this weird shape. And it moved them because I picked joint. If I would have picked as built joint, it would have kept them in place. So I would have been expected to have this already moved into this spot if that's where I actually wanted it. Okay, then I have options of flipping it. So if I flip this, it's actually going to put the cube inside of this thing, which is undesirable. And I can offset it or rotate things, kind of add some fine tuning to that. I'm just going to hit OK. So now if I try to, let's get this guy out of here again. Now if I try to move this box, these 2 move together because they are joined with a rigid joint. That's basically like gluing the pieces together. Now you'll notice too that whenever I move something, this little icon appears up here. It's asking me, do I want to capture the position or do I want to revert? If I capture the position, then my boxes or my objects, whatever I have, are going to stay put right here. And then this icon is going to disappear. If I hit the other button, it's actually going to go back to where it used to be. So the reason they have this is because you can sit here and test. You can test the movements of things and say like, oh yeah, this is moving the way I want it to. And then you can just revert it back. to kind of the standard position of your object. So like that piston thing that I just showed you a minute ago in the other project, I would kind of test the movement to see if everything is working, and then I would revert it back to the position, because I don't want things in like really weird positions when I'm modeling. Okay, so that's a rigid joint. Notice too, whenever I put a joint like that, I can select it right there by clicking on it. I can also go down here and select it. Either way, I can go to edit joint and change a few things if I need to. It also appears right here in your brand new joints folder. So as long as I have the top component active like this, my joints folder is going to go up here. If I had a different component active, the joints folder would go inside that component. Let's keep all of our joints up here. So if I wanted to get rid of that now, I can just right click and delete it. And of course, everything goes back to the way it used to be. Okay, so let's show a few things here. I modeled out some objects just to show you what a couple of these things do. Let's move this little guy out the way. You go right there now. Okay. So let's see what these different joints are. So I'm going to go to joint, and I get this little drop down that appears kind of in the middle of nowhere. These options right here just let you pick the two components and pick the joint placement. But this is how you actually pick what type of joint you want. I'm going to go through each of these. So I just did rigid. Let's do Revolute. So Revolute is just basically a spinning joint. So like this one right here is what I've got for Revolute. Okay, so the Revolute one, I'm going to pick this one right here. And I'm going to pick that one right there. And it's going to show you a preview of what this looks like if it's working. And sometimes that preview is like really weird. Sometimes it'll be at a weird angle or something like that. Usually that's okay. Usually you can kind of tweak things and fix it. But let's go ahead and hit OK and see what this does. So now if I just kind of grab this object anywhere and tug on it, it's supposed to turn around this object. And I think the reason it's not working right now is because we need to tell this object to stay put. So the problem is right now, if I'm grabbing this, it's just kind of moving everything, taking everything with it. So let's go to this object and tell this one it's not allowed to move. So if we right click on this component, what we're looking for is ground, which is right here, the second option down. If we choose ground, you're going to see a little push pin right there. And that's telling this cylinder, when I'm grabbing this and trying to turn it, this one can't move. So let's see what happens. Whee! That's fun. That's fun. I could do this all day. Okay, so revert position. Okay, so at this point I need to tell you my cat is coming in here to see what's going on, and she's very asthmatic. Let's see if you can hear her breathing. Watch this. Ugh, come here. Can you hear my cat? Oh yeah, sure. Now she's being quiet. So anyway, if you hear something that sounds like an old lady that can't breathe, that's my old lady cat. Okay, so let's keep on adding some joints. Let's go up here to add another one. Just gonna click the joint button. We just did Revolute, so let's check out slider joint. So I've got this little guy right here that I would like to put into here for a slider joint. So let's pick, I want to pick this little triangle right here on the top, but you notice how this keeps switching? If that switches like that, it's actually going to give me a bad result. I'll show you. So I'm going to pick that one, and I'm going to pick that one. Watch what happens. Not what I want. So how do we fix that? So as you're hovering over a joint, especially the ones on the edges like this, or ones that are hard to reach on the inside of an object, in order to kind of hold this face so it doesn't switch over to this face, if you hover over the face that you want and say, okay, yes, I definitely want this face, but I want that little triangle, that little guy right there. When you're hovering over the face, on the keyboard, hold in the control button. So I'm holding in the control button right now. Notice I can't switch faces now. It's not like switching to that side face. So now I can pick the one that I want. I'm going to pick this one right here. And then I'm going to pick, same thing, I'm going to hold in control right here, and I'm going to pick that little triangle right there. Let's see what happens now. Okay, so the little square is at least laying in there where it fits now. I'm going to rotate that. So this is the way I wanted it, but I don't want it to slide up and down like it showed. And I do want it flipped like that. So let's just see what happens. Let's see what happens. See this little slider right here? It's saying like, I think it's pointing that direction there. So let's go to this one. That's this guy right here. I like to click on things over here to see what gets underlined over here. That's how I find things. So then I'm going to right click and go to ground. And let's see what happens. Yeah, that's sliding the wrong direction. That's cockamamie. Cockamamie, I tell you. Okay, so let's go back over to this joint right here and edit that joint. That's only the limits. Let's go down here and edit the joint. And I want this little guy to be 90 degrees, I think. I just hit the microphone. Sorry about that. Well, that didn't do what I wanted it to do. Let's do, so it did that face and that face. Let's try something else. Let's go back here to where actually, let's just go back. Doop-a-doop. Okay, I'm stepping back in time. This little back button down here steps you back in time. So that joint and that grounding never happened. Let's go back up here. So I picked the top face here and the other face here. Let's try a side face. See if that gives us better results. So if I pick that one and then I go over here and I pick where this one lines up. So that's supposed to be like right there. Now it's sliding in the right direction. Okay. So sometimes you just got to kind of tell Fusion explicitly what you want to do. All right, I'm going to hide this one, or I'm going to ground this one. So I click on it to see what highlights over here, because I did not name my things. I wanted you to see that they were components. So I'm going to right click and go to ground. Now if I take this little rectangle and I drag it, it's going to slide inside of that slot, which is really cool. That's what we want. Okay, so that is the slider joint. I'm actually going to get rid of that because the next joint that I want to show you is a little bit similar. Made specifically for cylinders. So let's get this little guy and say outskis. Okay. And we'll capture all the positions. All right, I want to take this guy now that I have grounded previously. I want to take him and unground him. I do want to keep this guy grounded. And let's take this one and put it into this slot right here and do a different kind of joint. Ah, look at that. We can do between two faces. This did not used to be there. Okay, let's do the front face, and we'll do, I don't know, whatever. Why are you not? Why? So it looks like you would eventually, you'd want to have like a, there we go. So that's the right thing. but it would expect you to have like a pivot point floating out there. So you'd have to do some construction and find a way to get a point through the center of something to place out there. But we can manually move this down now and hit OK. So after a lot of hard work there, what we have is this little pin that slides down here, but also this little guy can rotate. So if you can see that, he's turning as well as the thing going through there. Now, one thing that you are noticing is, yeah, we can take these things like way out of where they're supposed to go. That's where joint limits come into play later. So I could show you, you know what, I'll show you a joint limit right now. So up here where the joint is, you get this little orange icon. It says edit joint limits. Let's take a look. We can say this one has two motions on it. It rotates this part, but it also slides down the slot. That's what a pin slot is. So I just want to limit the sliding, and I'm going to do a minimum and a maximum. So the minimum that I want to do is, let's say right there. So I'm going to drag that little blue arrow over there with the minimum checked. So that's about as far as I want to go on that side. The maximum that I want to do is looks like 1.4 that way and a negative on the other side. So I'm going to do that. And if I hit the animate button, it's going to show me what that looks like. So now it can't go out of that slot, which is really cool. Hit OK. So now if I drag this little guy around, it should give me a more believable motion. So that's joint limits. You're going to be using joint limits in a minute too. Okay, that was long and arduous and crazy, and I feel like crying now, but we have more to do, so let's keep chugging. Revert those positions. That'll throw it back in the center there. Let's do another joint. So I'm going to take this guy, and we did a revolute, we did a slider, we did a pin slot. Let's do cylindrical. Cylindrical is like a piston in a car, or you know, your little screen door has that little piston at the top to kind of let it close slowly. So let's do that. So piston, I'm just going to pick the middle one right there, and then I need the middle of the inside, the little hole in there. So again, I have to hit Control to kind of keep my selection. Now I can pick which one I want, and I want the center to line up with the center, or I could start it at the beginning. You know, it doesn't really matter. But it's going to show you that that is the motion. Again, I don't want it to move up and down like that because that's weird and unnatural. But if we hit OK, now if I take this, again, this part right here has to be grounded. So let's find it and go over to ground. Yes, capture that position. Sure. And now if I move that, it's like a little piston movement. Okay, so I can limit that again so it doesn't pull all the way out or push all the way through like this. Not good to have bodies intersecting like that because that can't happen in real life. So let's go ahead and edit those limits, I guess. Might as well show you again. So I don't care about the rotation. Again, I just want to limit the sliding. Let's do a minimum of, and you got to pull on that little blue arrow. So minimum of that, then a maximum. The second blue arrow is always like the tricky one. All right, I don't want it to go all the way out there, so we'll do that. And animate. Perfect. Hit OK. So now that moves naturally, just like an actual piston would. So that's cool. I'm actually going to get rid of that joint completely because I want to show you a much cooler joint, a ball joint. That's why I made this thingy right here. Joint. We're going to pick this guy, center of the sphere, and I'm going to go up here and I'm going to do center of the inside sphere. And that is not going to do that. We're going to go to ball joint. A ball joint is just like a shoulder socket. So I'm going to hit OK. I got to ground this. You guessed it. Ground. And I'm going to take this and whee, look at that. So we could actually, if this and this were separate components, if they weren't like one joined body, I could actually make this one a some other kind of joint. I'm not sure. I'd have to experiment actually to see what we could do with keeping that in there like that. Let's do one more. I think there's one more left. We did do that. So planar is the only one left. So planar is like scooting a couch around the floor. So I'm gonna pick this guy. You know what? I'm gonna pick the top face just to show you one more time what picking the wrong face does. So I'm gonna pick the top face of that. I'm gonna pick the bottom of that one, and whee! Okay. So you saw how the cube flipped all the way around just to get there. That's just weird. So if I take this, now I can scoot it around like that. I know, it looks just like going to, going over here and hitting move and taking this and just dragging it around. I know it looks like that, but this is dynamic, meaning if all these things were connected in different ways, this one would freely move this way, but not up and down. So it is a different thing. This is not to get things into position for modeling. This is to see how things interact with solid objects. Okay, hopefully all of that makes sense to you. Just remember to hit Control to pick the right snapping points for your joints. And remember to do joint instead of as built joint. And remember that if you mess it up, you can just right click here and delete a joint. And they can all just go bye-bye. Remember to right click and ground the object that you need to ground so it doesn't move. And that's pretty much it for joints.